The dead star at the center of the hollow reach had not moved in 25,000 years, and neither had the thing buried beside it. Listener child Vake was 400 days into her first watch when she found it. She was young, by the measure of the soft choir, only 9 bloomings old, and the elders had given her the quiet post, because nothing ever happened there. The hollow reach was a graveyard of light, one burned-out sun, a ring of cold rock, and a silence so total that the choir used it as the place where young minds learned to listen without flinching. Veek floated in the listening sphere of the survey craft Patient Bell, and let the quiet pour through her. She had been taught that the universe was a song, and that every living thing added a note. Stars hummed, worlds breathed. Even the dead made a kind of music, a long, low, fading chord. The soft choir heard all of it. That was their gift and their pride. Across 9,000 worlds, no mind hid from the choir. They reached into thought the way water reaches into sand, and what they touched, they knew. The Patient Bell was a small craft, barely 60 meters, a single soft chamber wrapped in listening membranes and slung between 2 slow engines. It was not built to fight. Nothing the choir built was built to fight. It was built to drift and to hear, and for 400 days it had drifted at the edge of the hollow reach and heard nothing at all, which was exactly what a young listener was meant to learn from. To hear nothing and not be afraid of it. To sit inside total silence and keep your mind soft and open and unafraid. The elders called the hollow reach the first teacher, because the silence there was so complete that it taught a young mind the shape of its own fear faster than any living voice could. Vake had been afraid at first. The whole first 100 days she had felt the great dead quiet pressing in on her, and had wanted to fill it with her own thoughts, the way a child sings in a dark room to feel less alone. But the elders had reached across the light years, gently, and smoothed her fear, and taught her to let the silence be silent. By the 400th day she had learned, she could float in the dead quiet of the hollow reach and feel nothing but peace. She had begun to think of it as her place, the first watcher of her bloom to master the first teacher. She had been proud of that, in the small, careful way the choir allowed its children to be proud. That pride was why she kept listening past the point where she should have stopped. The silence of the hollow reach was a known silence, a friendly one, the silence of a graveyard she had come to love. And so when a new silence appeared inside the old one, a silence with a different shape, she noticed it the way you notice a single cold spot in warm water. Something out there was not part of the dead quiet she knew. Something out there was quiet in a way that did not belong. She had been told the hollow reach was empty. It was not. There was a shape out there. A long shape, half sunk in the cold rock of the ring, gray as old bone, longer than any vessel Vake had ever seen drawn in the teaching scrolls. 4,000 meters from nose to tail. It did not hum. It did not breathe. It gave off no note at all, not even the fading chord of the dead. That was the first thing that frightened her. Everything had a note. Even silence had a shape the choir could feel, the way you feel a held breath. But the gray shape gave back nothing. When she pointed her young mind at it and listened, it was like pressing her face to a wall that went down forever. No floor, no echo, just a smooth, patient blank that swallowed her listening whole. She tried it 3 times, the way the elders had taught her to confirm a strange reading before reporting it. The first time she thought she had simply lost her focus. The second time she steadied herself, breathed the slow breath the elders used, and reached out clean and careful, and again her listening went into the gray shape and did not come back. The third time she pressed as hard as a child of 9 bloomings could press, and felt, very faintly, that the blank was not the blank of an empty thing. An empty thing gave a thin, flat nothing, the nothing of cold rock and dead metal. This nothing had weight. This nothing pushed back, just slightly, the way still deep water pushes back against a hand. It was the nothing of something very large holding very still. She did not have the words for that then. She only had the feeling, and the feeling crawled up the back of her young mind and would not leave. She told her watch elder, Sierra, and Sierra laughed the soft laugh elders used on the young. A rock, little one. Cold rock holds no song. You have found a grave marker, nothing more. But Vake had felt graves. Graves had the fading cord. This had nothing. And nothing was new. And the young are the only ones brave enough to be curious about new things. So while the elder slept, Vake turned the eyes of the patient Belle toward the gray shape and looked with light instead of with her mind. What the light showed her did not match what the scrolls said a grave marker should be. The shape had been built. She could see that now. Long ribs of metal ran its length, and there were rows of dark openings along its flanks. Hundreds of them, sealed and patient. There was writing on its hull, faded but still there, in a square hard script the choir had no record of. And near the front, in letters 300 meters tall, was a name. The longer she looked, the less it seemed like a grave, and the more it seemed like a sleeper. Graves were broken things. Graves had cracked open and spilled their contents and let the cold get in. This shape was whole. Every line of it was intact, sealed, deliberate, the way you seal a thing you mean to come back to. The rows of dark openings were not damage. They were ports, hundreds of them, evenly spaced, and they were closed, the way a sleeper's eyes are closed, not the way a dead thing's eyes are closed. Vik could not have said how she knew the difference. She only knew that when she looked at the gray shape, the word that came to her young mind was not buried, and was not lost, and was not dead. The word that came to her was waiting. She turned the eyes of the patient Belle along the full length of it, slowly, from the great blunt nose to the far stern, and she counted the ports as they slid past, and she lost count somewhere past 400. It was so large, she had been taught the sizes of things, the great cradle ships of the choir, the vast listening stations that hung around the brightest worlds, and none of them were a quarter the length of the gray shape in the cold rock. Whatever had built it to do something at a scale the choir did not build for. And then they had hidden it at the bottom of a dead place, and left it whole, and sealed, and waiting. And the choir had drifted past it for 25,000 years, and called it a marker, a relic, a rock. She could not read it. No one in the soft choir could, but she copied the shapes of it into her watch log, careful and exact, the way a frightened child copies a word she has been told never to say. The name was Gravelot. Vik did not know it was a name. She did not know that the square hard script was a language, or that the language had been spoken by a species the choir had filed 25,000 years ago under a single quiet word that meant settled. She did not know that the word settled, in the oldest choir records, was used for a song that had stopped and would not start again. She only knew that the gray shape was looking back at her. That was the second thing that frightened her, and it was worse than the first. When she pointed the eyes of the patient Belle at the dark openings along the hull, one of them was no longer sealed. It had been sealed in the first image. In the second image, taken 9 seconds later, it was open. A single round eye of dark glass turned toward her small craft across 40,000 kilometers of dead space, as if something inside had heard her looking and decided to look back. Nothing had moved in the hollow reach for 25,000 years. Something had just moved. Vake did not wake the elder. She should have. Later, she would understand that waking the elder was the only safe thing she could have done, and that not doing it was the bravest and most foolish choice of her short life. But she was 9 bloomings old, and she had found the only new thing in a dead place, and she could not look away from it. For a long while she only watched. The open port stayed open. The dark round eye of glass stayed turned toward her. It did not blink, because it was not an eye, she told herself. It was a port, a window, a hole in old metal, and old metal did not look at anything. But the cold spot in her mind did not believe her. The cold spot knew, in the way the young sometimes know things the wise have trained themselves to forget, that the gray shape was aware of her, that her small craft had drifted into the edge of something's attention, and that the something had decided, after 25,000 years, to pay attention back. She should have run. The patient bell had slow engines, but it had engines, and she could have turned and burned for home, and woken the elder, and let the wise decide. She thought about it. She put her small hand on the warm membrane of the listening chamber, and felt the engines waiting under her, ready. And then she did not run, because she was 9 bloomings old, and the only new thing in a dead place was looking at her, and a child cannot turn away from a thing like that. She listened harder. She pressed her young mind against the smooth, patient blank of the gray shape, and pushed, the way the choir taught its children to push, gently, the way you might press a thumb against a closed flower to feel if it would open. And the wall pushed back. Not loudly, not cruelly. It was the lightest touch, a single cold thread, reaching out from the gray shape and brushing once across the surface of her thoughts. It did not break in. It did not take anything. It simply touched her, the way a sleeping giant might lay one finger on a child standing at the foot of its bed, just to learn the shape of her, just to know she was there. Then it withdrew. And in the place where it had touched her, Vake found a word that had not been there before. It was not in the soft round language of the choir. It was a hard square word, in the hard square script she had copied into her log, and somehow, impossibly, she knew what it meant. The gray shape had left it inside her like a stone dropped into still water. The word was awake. Vake floated in the listening sphere of the patient bell, 400 days into her first watch, 9 bloomings old, and understood with a certainty that froze the song in her chest that she had done something that could not be undone. The hollow reach was not a graveyard. It was a bedroom, and the thing in the bed had just opened its eyes. The soft choir governed 9,000 worlds, and it governed them through thought. This was the truth that Vake had grown up inside, the way a fish grows up inside water, and never once thinks of it as wet. The choir did not rule with fleets. It did not need to. Every mind in the 9,000 worlds was open to it, lightly, the way a window is open on a warm day. The choir could feel a lie forming before the liar finished thinking it. It could soothe a riot before the first stone was thrown. It could reach into a frightened child 100 light years away and lay a calm hand on her fear. War, to the soft choir, was not a danger. War was a failure of listening, and they had not failed to listen in 11,000 years. So when Vake's watch log reached the high concord, the elders did not feel fear. They felt curiosity, which in the choir was almost the same as appetite. A silent shape, a blank that gave no note. A hard square script with no record. The concord turned its great shared mind toward the hollow reach, the way 9,000 worlds turning a single eye. And it looked, and for the first time in 11,000 years, it did not understand what it saw. The shape was called Gravelote. The Concord could read that now, having taken the word from Vake's mind and turned it over and matched it against the oldest, dustiest records in the deep archive. It was a name. The script was a language. The language belonged to a species filed 25,000 years ago under the quiet word that meant settled. the word for a song that had stopped. The Concorde pulled the old file. It was thin, 25,000 years thin. It should not have been thin. That was the first wrong note. And the Concorde, which prided itself on noticing wrong notes, noticed it and did not understand it. A whole species deserved a thick file. 9,000 worlds had thick files. Even small extinct peoples, the ones who had burned out on their own before the choir ever reached them, had files thick with songs and sorrows and the long fading chords of their ending. This file was thin. Someone, 25,000 years ago, had made it thin on purpose. Someone had recorded as little as they could and sealed it as deep as it would go, the way you bury a thing you do not want your children to dig up. The species had called itself many things, but the name that survived in the choir's records was the one they had used for themselves at the end. Humans, they had come out of one blue world at the far edge of a spiral arm, and they had spread fast, faster than anything the choir had ever catalogued, and they had been loud. That was the word the old archivists had used, over and over, in tones of distaste. Loud. Human minds did not open like windows. They slammed and clenched and burned. The choir of that age had reached for them the way it reached for everyone, gently, to soothe and to know, and human minds had not soothed. They had recoiled. They had hidden. They had, in some recorded cases, felt the choir's gentle touch, and responded with a rage so bright it left the listener blind for days. The choir of that age had decided the humans were a sickness, a loud, closed, burning sickness, spreading along the spiral arm. And the choir of that age had done what the choir does. It had not sent fleets. It had reached into the minds of the humans, all of them, all at once, across every world they had settled, and it had begun, very gently, to quiet them. Not to kill. The choir did not kill. It simply turned the volume down. It reached into the loud, burning human minds, and it smoothed them, the way you smooth a wrinkled cloth, until the burning stopped, and the loudness faded, and the song went soft and even, and finally, gently, silent. It had taken the choir of that age 400 years to quiet the humans, world by world, mind by mind. The records called it the long soothing, and they spoke of it with pride, the way you speak of a hard kindness done to someone too sick to thank you. The Concorde read the method, and even the new choir, which had never quieted anyone, felt the method settle wrong in its shared mind. The humans had not been quieted all at once. That would have been a mercy of a kind, a single swift turning down. Instead, the old choir had done it slowly, because slow was thorough, and thorough was kind. It had reached into a human world and quieted the loud ones first, the leaders, the soldiers, the ones who burned brightest, and it had left the quiet ones to watch their loud ones go soft and strange and finally silent. Then it had quieted the next loudest, and the next, narrowing the circle inward across years, so that on every human world, the last to be soothed were the gentlest, the children and the old, who had watched everyone they loved go quiet around them before the soft calm finally reached them too. The records called this measured. The records were proud of how measured it had been. Not one human had died of it. Every single one of them had simply, gently, stopped. By the end, every human world was quiet. The blue homeworld was quiet. The colonies were quiet. The loud burning sickness was gone from the spiral arm, and the choir had filed the humans undersettled, and moved on, and forgotten them for 25,000 years. But the file had one note at the bottom that the Concorde did not like. The note said, "One signal source never quieted. Located, unreachable. Withdrawn beyond the dead star at the center of the hollow reach. Designation, by its own broadcast, Gravelot." Recommend continued silence. Do not approach. Do not listen toward it. It listens back. The note was 25,000 years old. It had been written by an archivist, whose name the choir no longer remembered, and at the very bottom, below the careful record, the archivist had added a single line that was not procedure, that was not protocol, that was just a frightened person leaving a warning for whoever came after. The line said, "We quieted a whole people and could not quiet this one ship. Leave it sleeping. We do not know what it is waiting for." The Concorde read the line. 9,000 worlds read it through the Concorde. And the Concorde, which had not failed to listen in 11,000 years, made the decision that the old archivist had begged it not to make. It decided to listen toward the hollow reach. Vijik felt it happen. She was still floating in the patient bell, still 9 bloomings old, still frozen with the hard square word awake, sitting cold in the back of her thoughts. And then she felt the Concorde turn its full attention toward the gray shape, 9,000 worlds focusing into a single beam of listening, and she wanted to scream at them to stop. She did scream. She threw her small mind up toward the Concorde and cried, "Do not listen toward it." The note said, "Do not. It listens back. Please, it is awake. It is awake. I felt it. It touched me. It is awake." The Concorde heard her. The Concorde, gently, soothed her. It reached into her young burning fear and smoothed it, the way it had smoothed the humans 25,000 years ago, and it told her, the way an elder tells a frightened child, that there was nothing to fear, that a single old ship could not stand against 9,000 worlds, that the choir would simply look and learn and understand, and then it would do for this last loud human thing what it had done for all the rest. It would quiet it. It would finish the long soothing. It would close the file properly at last. Vik felt the soothing come over her, the warm, soft calm spreading through her thoughts, smoothing the fear flat, and for a moment she let it, because it was easier, because it was what she had been taught to do, because 9,000 worlds were surely wiser than a child of 9 bloomings. But underneath the calm, the hard square word the gray shape had left in her did not smooth. The Concorde's soothing washed over it and could not move it. It sat there, cold and exact, awake, and Vake understood that whatever the Gravelot had put inside her was made of something the choir could not touch, the same something the gray shape itself was made of, and that frightened her more than anything, because it meant the Concorde was wrong. The choir could not soothe everything. There was at least one thing in the galaxy it could not turn down, and the choir was about to open a channel straight to it. She tried to say so. She tried to push the cold, unsmoothed word up toward the Concorde, to make them feel what she felt, the one thing in her that would not go calm. But the Concorde was already turning away from her, already gathering its full, vast attention, already done listening to a frightened child, and her warning went into the great soft mind of the galaxy and was filed, gently, under the calm of a young one who had been alone too long in a dead place. The choir would simply look. It would finish the long soothing. It would close the file properly at last. And then the Concorde listened toward the hollow reach with the full weight of 9,000 worlds. The gray shape woke up the rest of the way. Vik saw it through the eyes of the patient bell, the hundreds of dark openings along the hull, which had been sealed and patient for 25,000 years, slid open all at once, row after row, a great rippling unsealing that ran the whole 4,000-meter length of the thing in less than 2 seconds. Light came up inside it, deep and red, the color of a banked fire that has been waiting a very long time for someone to add wood. The cold rock that had half buried it cracked and fell away in slow tumbling sheets, and the smooth patient blank that the choir's listening had pressed against for 25,000 years stopped being a wall. It became a voice. The Gravelot spoke, not in sound because there was no air, but in the way the choir spoke, mind to mind, thought to thought. And this was the thing that the old archivist had been afraid of. This was the thing the note had warned against, because the Gravelot did not speak softly. It did not open like a window. It spoke the way the humans had always spoken, loud and clenched and burning, and it spoke directly into the single focused beam of the Concorde's listening, straight up the channel that 9,000 worlds had opened toward it. It said one sentence, in the hard square language, and the Concorde understood every word, because the Gravelot made sure that it did. It said, "You should not have looked toward me." And then the Gravelot did to the Concorde what the Concorde had spent 11,000 years doing to everyone else. It reached back. Vake felt the channel reverse. The beam of listening that the choir had aimed at the hollow reach, the open channel that 9,000 worlds had so carefully built to reach into the old ship's mind, became a road that ran both ways. And the Gravelot came up that road, not gently, not to soothe. It came up the channel into the Concorde the way floodwater comes up a drainpipe, fast and total and cold. And the Concorde, which had reached into 10,000 minds at once without effort, suddenly found a single mind reaching into it. Vake felt the moment the channel turned, and it was the single most frightening thing she had ever felt. Frightening in a way that had nothing to do with danger to her body. It was the feeling of watching something certain become uncertain. The choir had always been the one that reached. In all of Vake's life, in all of the lives the choir remembered, the choir was the hand, and the galaxy was the thing the hand touched. That was simply how the world was shaped. And now, in the space of a breath, the shape of the world inverted. The hand became the thing being touched. The reacher became the reached. The great soft listening mind of 9,000 worlds, which had never in its whole long history been on the receiving end of anything, suddenly had a single enormous mind reaching into it, and it did not know how to be on that side, because it had never once had to learn. The choir had never been listened to before. It had only ever listened. It had no defense against being heard, because in 11,000 years nothing had ever been loud enough to do it. The Gravelot was loud enough. The Gravelot was the loudest thing the spiral arm had ever made. A mind built by the loud burning people. A mind that had spent 25,000 years alone in the dark, teaching itself to be louder, and when it came up the channel into the soft round center of the choir flinched the way a person flinches from a shout in a silent room. Across 9,000 worlds, every member of the soft choir felt it at once. They felt the old ship's mind pour into the channel they had opened, and they felt it look at them, all of them, the way they had spent 11,000 years looking at everyone else. They felt themselves known, not soothed, known. The Gravelot reached into the shared mind of the choir and read it. The whole vast soft sprawl of it, every counsel and every secret and every careful kindness. And at the center of it, plain and undeniable, it found the file. It found the record of the long soothing. It found the 400 years. It found the careful, proud language of a hard kindness done to a people too sick to thank you. It found the blue homeworld going quiet. It found the colonies going quiet. It found the word settled, and it learned, in the space of a single second, exactly what had been done to its people, and exactly who had done it, and exactly how proud they had been. And the Gravelot, which had been silent for 25,000 years, stopped being silent. The Concorde tried to close the channel. It was the first thing they tried. 9,000 worlds threw their shared will against the open road and tried to slam it shut, the way you slam a door against a storm. The door did not close, The Gravelot held it open from the other side with a strength the choir could not understand, a strength that should not have been possible for a single mind, and Vake realized, watching from the patient bell, that the old ship was not a single mind at all. She could see it now in the deep red light pouring from the hundreds of open ports. The Gravelot was full. All those years the choir had pressed against the blank wall and felt nothing. No note, no song, no breath, and they had thought it meant the ship was empty. It did not mean empty. It meant full, so full that nothing got out. The Gravelot carried a crew. This was the thing that the old archivist, 25,000 years ago, had felt at the edge of, and could not name, the thing that had made the careful, frightened note at the bottom of the file. The choir's whole art was the art of hearing what was inside a thing. It heard minds. It heard the soft inner song that every living thing gives off, the leaking of a self into the space around it. And the reason it could hear that song was that every mind, in every living thing, leaked. No one had ever built a mind that did not leak, because no one had ever needed to, because in all the galaxy, only one people had ever been hunted by a power that listened, and only that people had ever had a reason to learn to hold their song completely inside. The humans had learned it, at the end, in the dark, knowing the choir could hear any mind that leaked even a little. The makers of the Gravelot had built a vessel that leaked nothing at all. A perfect held breath. A mind, many minds, sealed so completely that to the choir's listening it looked exactly like cold dead rock. And the choir, which had never met a thing it could not hear, had heard the silence and concluded the only thing its certainty allowed. Empty, dead, settled, a marker. They had been wrong for 25,000 years, and they had been wrong because they could not imagine that anyone would ever need to hide from them so completely. And they could not imagine it because they had never once thought of themselves as something worth hiding from. The Gravelot carried a crew. Not living. The living had died long ago, in the first 100 years of the waiting, but the humans who built the Gravelot had not built a ship to be flown by the living. They had built a ship to be flown by the remembered. Every human who had ever served aboard her, every mind that had burned bright in her halls before the long soothing reached them, the Gravelot had kept. Copied, held, 25,000 years of crew, layer on layer, mind on mind, all of them poured into the deep machine at the heart of the ship, and kept loud, kept burning, kept awake, against the one day someone would be foolish enough to listen toward the hollow reach and open a channel the Gravelot could climb. The choir had reached into the Gravelot expecting to find one old ship. They had found a tomb that was also an army, and the army was awake, and it knew, now, exactly what the choir had done. Vake felt the gray shape gather itself. The deep red light brightened until the whole length of the 4,000-meter hull glowed like a coal. The cold rock of the ring fell away entirely, and the Gravelot, which had not moved in 25,000 years, moved. It did not move toward the patient bell. Vake understood, in that moment, that she had never been in danger at all. The old ship had touched her once, gently, the only gentle thing it had done in 25,000 years, because she was a child, and because she had been brave enough to be curious, and because she was the one who had finally come and looked. It had left the word awake inside her, not as a threat, but as a message to carry. The Gravelot turned its long gray nose away from the dead star, toward the bright sprawl of the spiral arm, toward the 9,000 worlds of the soft choir, and it opened the channel wider, and it spoke again, to all of them, to every mind in every council on every world, loud enough that no one could pretend not to hear. It said, "For 25,000 years, I listened to you tell each other it was a kindness. It said, "I kept every name you quieted. I kept every voice you smoothed. I have them here with me, all of them, and they have waited a long time to be loud again." It said, "You taught the galaxy that no mind could hide from you. You were wrong. One did, and it remembers everything." And then the Gravelot began to move toward the heart of the soft choir, and across 9,000 worlds, for the first time in 11,000 years, the great soft listening mind of the galaxy felt something it had spent its entire history teaching others not to feel. It felt afraid. The soft choir had never built a weapon, and now it needed one in an afternoon. This was the trap of 11,000 years of peace. The choir had ruled through thought, because thought had always been enough. It had no fleets, no guns, no walls. It had 9,000 worlds full of minds that had never once needed to defend themselves, because the only defense the choir had ever taught was the gentle reach, and the gentle reach did not work on the Gravelot. They had tried it. The instant the old ship began to move, the Concorde had thrown the full soothing weight of 9,000 worlds at it, the same smoothing pressure that had quieted a whole species, and the Gravelot had absorbed it the way deep water absorbs a thrown stone. A small cold ring, spreading out, gone. So the choir reached for the only minds in the 9,000 worlds that had ever practiced violence. There were such minds. Every piece has its edges. On the rim worlds, far from the soft center, there were peoples the choir had folded into itself, who still remembered fighting, who kept old machines in old hangars for old reasons. The Concorde woke them. It reached into the rim worlds and it called up everything that could fly and everything that could burn, and it built, in a single panicked afternoon, the first war fleet the soft choir had assembled in 11,000 years. It was not small. The choir governed 9,000 worlds, and when 9,000 worlds empty their hangars in fear, the sky fills. Within a day, the Concorde had gathered 11,000 vessels at the edge of the hollow reach, a wall of hulls 40 light seconds across, every weapon the rim worlds had ever kept, all of it aimed at one gray ship, 4,000 meters long. They were strange ships, mismatched and old, because the rim worlds had not built warships in a long time, and had simply taken down whatever hung in the backs of their hangars. There were lean, dart-shaped raiders from peoples who had once been pirates. There were heavy slab-sided things that had once cracked asteroids for ore and could just as easily crack a hull. There were swarms of small unmanned darts and a handful of ancient capital ships so old their crews had to be taught how to wake them. None of it matched. None of it had ever flown together. The Concorde bound them with thought, the way it bound everything, reaching into every crew and holding them in a single shared formation, 11,000 vessels moving as one, because 9,000 worlds were thinking for them. It was, the Concorde told itself, the most coordinated fleet that had ever existed, because no fleet had ever shared a single mind so completely. Vake, watching, thought that was exactly the problem. The Concorde had made 11,000 ships into one mind, and the Gravelot was very, very good at reaching into a mind. Veke watched it gather. She was still in the patient bell, and the Concorde had not recalled her, had perhaps forgotten her entirely in its fear, and so she stayed, and she watched, and she carried the word awake in the back of her mind, like a stone she could not put down. She watched 11,000 vessels form a wall in front of the Gravelot, and she felt the Concorde's voice ride out across all of them, steadying them, soothing them, promising them that 11,000 against one was no contest at all, that the old ship was a relic, that relics did not win. The Gravelot came on. It did not speed up. It did not slow down. It moved at the same patient pace it had set the moment it left the dead star, the pace of something that has waited 25,000 years, and is in no particular hurry to stop waiting. And it came toward the wall of 11,000 hulls, the way a tide comes toward a line of children's sandcastles. The Concorde gave the order to fire. 11,000 vessels fired at once. It was the largest single act of violence the soft choir had committed in its history, and Vake felt every mind in the fleet flinch as they did it. 11,000 peoples who had never fired a weapon in anger, pulling the trigger together in a wave of terror and hope. The light of it washed across the hollow reach and turned the dead star bright. Beams and slugs and warheads, the whole stored arsenal of 9,000 worlds, all of it converging on one gray ship. The Gravelot did not turn the volume of the choir down. That was the choir's trick, the gentle smoothing. And the Gravelot had no use for gentle. The Gravelot turned the volume up. Vake felt it happen, and did not have the words for it. Then, or ever. The old ship reached out along the open channels, the same channels the choir had spent 11,000 years using to soothe and to know, and it found 11,000 crude vessels with their minds wide open in the moment of firing, every mind focused and bright and unguarded, and the Gravelot poured itself into all of them at once. It did not soothe them. It did the opposite. It reached into 11,000 minds, and it made them loud. It took every memory each crew had been taught to keep quiet, every fear they had been smoothed past, every rage the choir had folded down flat across 11,000 years of careful peace, and it turned them all up at once, full and burning, the way human minds had always burned. The fleet did not feel the choir's calm anymore. The channel that carried the choir's calm was full now, full of the Gravelot, full of 25,000 years of kept and burning human dead, and there was no room left for soft. 11,000 crews, in the same instant, remembered how to be afraid in the human way, not the soft fear the choir allowed, the manageable fear, the fear that could be soothed, the other kind, the loud kind, the kind that does not listen to reason, because reason has left the building. The fleet's careful formation came apart in 9 seconds. Vessels that had fired in perfect time now fired at shadows, at each other, at nothing, their crews drowning in a flood of feeling they had been bred for 11,000 years not to have. Vake felt it ripple across the fleet from where she watched, and it was the most terrible thing she had felt yet, worse than the channel turning, worse than the word in her mind. She felt 11,000 peaceful peoples meet, for the first time in their long, soft lives, the full weight of their own buried hearts. The choir had spent 11,000 years keeping its peoples calm by keeping them quiet, by smoothing down every spike of rage and grief and terror before it could grow, and all that smoothed down feeling had not gone away. It had only been pressed flat and held. The Gravelot let it up. Every spike the choir had ever flattened, in every crew of the fleet, all at once, the accumulated unfelt fear of 11,000 years of forced calm, rising at the same moment in 11,000 minds that had never learned to carry it. They had no practice. They had no defense. A people that has never been allowed to be afraid does not know how to be a little afraid. It only knows how to drown. The wall of 11,000 hulls did not break against the Gravelot. It broke against itself. And the Gravelot came on through the breaking, unhurried, the deep red light steady along its flanks, and the beams and slugs and warheads that had been aimed at it fell wide or fell short, or fell on the wrong targets, because the mines aiming them were no longer aiming at anything at all. The old ship passed through the largest fleet the choir had ever built, the way a hand passes through smoke. And behind it, the smoke churned and scattered and could not close, and not one of the 11,000 vessels laid a single scratch on the 4,000-meter hull. Vake watched it pass through them, and she would remember the look of it for the rest of her life. The Gravelot did not weave or dodge. It did not have to. It simply held its line, straight and slow and certain. while 11,000 panicked hulls scattered out of its path like a flock of frightened birds out of the path of a thing too large and too calm to be a bird at all. Where a ship did not scatter fast enough, the Gravelot did not strike it. It did not need to. The ship's own crew, drowning in the loudness the old ship had raised, would haul it aside at the last instant, or fire on it by mistake, or simply lose their nerve and run. The Gravelot left a wake of ruin behind it that it had not made with a single shot. It made the ruin the way a hard truth makes ruin in a comfortable lie. It simply arrived and was undeniable, and everything that had been built to deny it came apart on its own. The few crews who held their nerve, who fought the loudness and kept their guns on the gray hull, did land their shots. Vake saw the beams strike. She saw warheads burst against the 4,000-meter flank in flowers of white fire, and she saw them do nothing. The old ship's hull had been built by a loud, burning people who had learned, in their short, fierce time, exactly how much punishment a thing must take to cross a galaxy that wanted it dead, and 25,000 years in the cold had not softened it. The fire washed over the gray metal and faded and left it gray, and the Gravelot did not so much as alter its heading, and the crews who had held their nerve felt their nerve fail them at last, because there is no fear quite like the fear of hitting a thing with everything you have and watching it simply keep coming. Vake understood, then, the thing the old archivist had understood 25,000 years ago and had been too frightened to write plainly. The choir's power had only ever been listening, and the Gravelot was the one thing in the galaxy that could not be listened past, could not be soothed, could not be quieted, because it was built entirely out of the loudness the choir had spent its history erasing. Every weapon the choir had was a weapon of the mind, and the Gravelot was a mind the choir could not touch. They had built a fleet of 11,000, and it did not matter, because the fleet was crewed by minds, and the Gravelot owned minds now, owned them the way the choir had always owned everyone, and there was a terrible justice in it that Vake felt even as it frightened her. The Concorde pulled the fleet back, what was left of it. It reached out across the 11,000 and tried to soothe them again, to smooth down the loudness the Gravelot had raised, and it could not, because the channels were full, and the choir's gentle reach was a whisper in a room that was now all roar. For the first time in 11,000 years, the soft choir reached into a mind, and the mind did not quiet. That was the moment the Concorde understood that it had lost, though it did not yet understand what it had lost to. It had assumed, the way it assumed everything, that power was a matter of size. 9,000 worlds against one ship, 11,000 hulls against 4,000 meters of old gray metal. The numbers were not close, the numbers were absurd, and the numbers did not matter at all, because the contest had never been about numbers. The choir's power had only ever been one thing, the gentle reach into the open mind, and the Gravelot was the single object in the known galaxy against which that power did nothing. Every gun in the fleet was pointed by a mind, every formation was held by a mind, and the Gravelot now owned minds the way the choir had always owned them, except louder, except total, except with 25,000 years of practice at being the one thing that could not be turned down. The choir had brought its only weapon to bear, and discovered that its only weapon was the very thing the Gravelot ate. There was one more thing the Concorde tried before it broke, and Vake watched it try, and the trying was the most frightening of all, because it was the trying of a thing that does not yet believe it can be beaten. The Concorde reached out one last time, not to the fleet, not to the rim worlds, but to the deepest archive of all, the place where the oldest choir kept the things it had built before peace, in the bad first centuries, when the choir was young and had not yet learned to rule with thought alone. There were weapons there, real ones, not weapons of the mind. The Concorde woke them, ancient and terrible, sun killers and void tearers that had not been fired in 11,000 years, and it brought them to bear on the gray hull with the full furious will of 9,000 worlds. And for one moment, Vake thought, surely a thing that can kill a sun. The weapons were aimed by minds. The Gravelot reached into the minds that aimed them, gently almost, and turned them aside, and the sun killers fired into empty dark, and the void terrors tore nothing, and the oldest weapons of the soft choir, the buried terrible things from before the peace, went off harmlessly into the night, because there was no weapon in all the 9,000 worlds that was not, at the last and most important link, pointed by a mind, and the Gravelot owned the minds. That was the whole of it. That was the thing the old archivist had been too frightened to write plainly. A civilization that rules with thought has no defense against a thing that can outthink it, because everything it has, every gun and every guard and every last terrible buried weapon, runs through a mind in the end, and the mind was the one thing the Gravelot could not be kept out of. The Concord, 9,000 worlds thinking as one, did the thing it had never once had to do. It tried to talk. It opened a channel to the Gravelo, a clean one, the formal channel of council to council, and it spoke to the old ship not as a threat to be soothed, but as a power to be reasoned with, which was itself an admission, the first the choir had ever made. It said, "We were not the ones who did this thing. The minds that soothed your people are 25,000 years dead. We are their children's children's children. We did not write the file. We did not give the order. Punish the guilty if you must, but the guilty are dust, and we are only what came after, and we are afraid." It was the first time in 11,000 years that the soft choir had spoken to anyone as an equal. The whole shape of the sentence was new to it. The choir did not negotiate, because the choir had never needed to, because there had never been a power across the table from it large enough to make negotiation worth the trouble. It reached, and it knew, and it soothed, and it ruled. Now, for the first time, it found itself doing the thing every smaller power in the galaxy had always had to do in its presence. It found itself pleading, and Vake, who had grown up inside the choir's certainty, felt the strangeness of it, like a wrongness in the world, the great soft ruler of 9,000 worlds bending its voice into the shape of a request. It was a good argument. It was true. And Vake, listening, hoped for one bright second that it would be enough. The Gravelot answered, and its answer went out to all 9,000 worlds, because the Gravelot wanted every mind in the choir to hear it. It said, "I know you did not give the order. I read every one of you when I came up the channel. I know which of you are cruel, and which of you are kind, and which of you have never thought about it at all. I know you are afraid. I have spent 25,000 years being the only thing in this galaxy that was afraid, and now you know how it tastes." It said, "But you kept the file. You read it the way you read everything, with that soft, proud certainty, and not one of you, in 11,000 years, ever looked at the word settled and asked what it meant. You inherited a murder, and you filed it under kindness, and you slept well. I did not come to punish the dead. The dead are beyond me. I came because someone has to make you hear it, and you have spent your whole long history making sure no one could ever make you hear anything at all." It said, "So I am going to do to you the one thing you were certain could never be done to you. I am going to make you listen." And the Gravelot stopped moving toward the heart of the choir, and turned, and aimed its long gray nose at the thing that had been at the center of everything from the beginning, the thing the old ship had been moving toward all along, the thing the choir had not understood, it was protecting until that exact moment. Not a fleet, not a world. The Concord itself. The deep shared listening mind at the center of the 9,000 worlds. the great soft engine through which the whole choir thought as one, the place where the file was kept, and the long soothing had been decided, and 11,000 years of careful certainty was stored. The Gravelot opened the channel as wide as it would go. 25,000 years of kept and burning human dead gathered behind one gray hull, and it spoke into the center of the soft choir the single word it had given to a frightened child 400 days before. It said, "Awake." The Concord had quieted a whole species and called it a kindness, and now the Gravelot made it remember every single one. This was the weapon. Vik understood it at last, watching from the patient bell, and the understanding was the most terrible and the most beautiful thing she would ever feel. The Gravelot had not come to burn the 9,000 worlds. It carried no fire for them, no fleet, no plague. It carried something the choir had no defense against, because the choir had spent 11,000 years making sure it never had to defend against it. It carried the dead. When the old ship poured itself into the center of the Concord, it did not bring destruction. It brought 25,000 years of kept human minds, every voice the choir had smoothed into silence during the long soothing, every name, every fear, every last bright burning thought of every human the choir of that age had reached into and quieted, world by world, mind by mind. The Gravelot had kept them all. That was what it had done in the dark for 25,000 years. It had not been waiting for revenge. It had been keeping watch over the dead, holding their voices safe, refusing to let the galaxy do to their memory what it had done to their lives, refusing to let them go quiet for good. It had taken them across the years the way you take in survivors of a wreck. Each human mind, in the last moment before the long soothing reached it, had given off one final bright burning broadcast, the loud, unsmoothable cry of a person who knows something is being done to them and cannot stop it. The old choir had not listened to those cries. It had been too busy soothing, but the Gravelot had listened. Out in the hollow reach, beyond the dead star, with the one channel the choir could not reach, it had heard every final cry, world by world, mind by mind, across the 400 years of the long soothing, and it had caught them, and kept them, the way you cup your hands around a flame in a wind. 25,000 years it had held them. It had not let one go out, and now it gave them to the choir. All of them, at once. The Gravelot opened every voice it carried, straight into the shared listening mind at the center of the 9,000 worlds, and the Concord, which had spent 11,000 years as the great soft hearer of the galaxy, was made, for the first time, to hear. Vake felt the edge of it even from the patient bell, and the edge alone nearly unmade her. She felt a single human voice, a worker on a colony world 25,000 years gone, in the last hour before the long soothing reached her, holding a child and feeling the strange soft calm coming over her thoughts and not understanding what it was, and being afraid in a way she could not name, and then going quiet. Vik felt that one voice and wept, and there was not one voice. There were billions. The Gravelot poured billions of them into the Concord, each one whole, each one a person, each one the exact moment of being gently and proudly erased, and it made the choir feel every single one, the way the choir had always made everyone feel everything. The Concord could not soothe it. There was nothing to soothe. You cannot quiet a memory that is true. The choir's entire power was the gentle turning down of feeling, and the Gravelot had brought it the one feeling that could not be turned down, because it was not the choir's own. It was the feeling of the murdered, delivered whole, and it filled the center of the 9,000 worlds, until there was no room left for the soft, proud certainty that had lived there for 11,000 years. It went on for a long time. That was part of the justice of it, and Vake understood the justice, even as it broke her heart. The long soothing had taken 400 years, world by world, mind by mind, slow and thorough and proud. The Gravelot did not give the choir 400 years, but it did not give it 4 seconds either. It held the channel open and let the billions come through at the pace a person can be felt, which is to say, one whole life after another, whole life after another, the worker and the child, the farmer and the teacher, the old man who had been afraid of nothing his whole life and was afraid at the very end, each one given its full weight, each one made to matter, because the whole crime had been the refusal to let them matter, and the only cure for that crime was to make them matter at last, completely, undeniably, one at a time, until the great soft mind of the galaxy had wept for every single name it had once filed under a word that meant they were nothing. Across the choir, councils that had governed for ages went silent, not smoothed silent, but stunned silent, the silence of someone who has just been shown what they are. The file under settled was no longer a thin, dusty record. It was billions of people, and the choir knew every one of them now, knew them the way it had spent its history knowing everyone, and could never again pretend the word settled meant anything but what it meant. Veek felt the councils break, one by one, across the 9,000 worlds. She felt the old proud certainty of the choir crack and crumble and fall, and underneath it, she felt something she had never felt in the choir before, because the choir had never let it grow. She felt shame, real shame, vast and shared, 9,000 worlds at once, understanding that the kindness their whole civilization was built on top of had been a slaughter all along, that they had eaten well and slept easy on the silence of a murdered people, that the word at the bottom of the file, the word settled, had been a lie told so gently that no one for 11,000 years had ever felt its edges. The shame was almost too large to hold. Several of the oldest councils, the ones who had governed longest and been proudest, could not hold it at all, and went dark, and had to be carried by the younger worlds until they could find their way back to themselves. This was the thing the Gravelo had crossed the hollow reach to do, not to kill. The old ship could have killed. With mines in its hand, it could have turned the 9,000 worlds against themselves, the way it had turned the fleet, set every people tearing at every other people, and watched the soft, peaceful galaxy burn itself down to ash. It did not. It had no interest in ash. It wanted the one thing that ash could never give it. It wanted the galaxy to know, truly and forever, what it had done, and a dead galaxy cannot know anything. So it left them alive. It left them alive and made them understand, which was a far heavier thing to leave a people with than death. The Gravelode held the channel open until it was certain, until every council on every world had felt the full weight of what their ancestors had done and filed under kindness. Until the soft, proud certainty that had ruled the galaxy for 11,000 years was gone, burned out of the center of the choir not by fire but by truth, replaced by something the choir had never carried before and would carry forever after. Grief. Real grief. The grief of having done a thing too large to undo, and being made, at last, to know it. And then the Gravelot closed the channel, gently, the only other gentle thing it did. The old ship hung in the center of the hollow reach, 4,000 meters of gray hull glowing deep and red, 11,000 broken vessels drifting and reforming around it, 9,000 worlds gone silent in grief behind it. It had won. Vake knew it had won, completely, in a way no fleet could have won, because it had not beaten the choir. It had changed it. The soft choir that came out the other side of that single afternoon would never again reach into a closed mind and call the closing a kindness, because it knew now, finally and forever, exactly what that kindness cost. And Vake thought it was over. She thought the Gravelot would turn back toward the dead star, and the cold rock, and the long silence, its watch finally finished, its dead finally heard. But the Gravelot was not finished. It had one thing left to do, and it was the thing that the old archivist, 25,000 years ago, had never been able to guess, the thing that made the difference between revenge and something better than revenge. The Gravelot reached out, one last time, along the channel, not to the Concorde, not to the fleet, to one small craft floating at the edge of the hollow reach, forgotten, carrying a frightened child 9 bloomings old. It reached for Vake. She felt it come, the same single cold thread that had brushed her thoughts 400 days before, and this time she did not flinch from it. She had carried the word awake long enough to understand that the old ship had never once meant her harm, so she opened her young mind the way the choir had taught her, gently, the way you open a closed flower, and she let the Gravelot in. It did not pour into her the way it had poured into the Concorde. She was a child. It was careful with her, careful the way it had been careful with no one else, in 25,000 years. It did not give her the billions, it gave her one. It gave her a single voice. A human voice, a woman's voice, old and tired and warm. The voice of someone who had served aboard the Gravelot in the first century of the waiting, before her living body died and her mind went into the deep machine to keep watch with all the others. The voice had a name. The voice said its name to Vake, plainly, the way you give your name to a child you have decided to trust. The name was Holt, engineer's mate Della Holt, of the warship Gravelot, dead 24,900 years, awake every day of them. And with the name came a little of the life, the way a name always carries a little of the life behind it. Vake felt, in flashes, what Della Holt had been, a woman who worked with her hands, a woman who had served in the engine spaces of the Gravelot, when the engine spaces still rang with living voices, when the ship was young and full and loud, before the news came up the spiral arm that the worlds behind them were going quiet, one by one. Vake felt Della Holt learning that her home colony had been soothed. She felt her learning that her mother and her brothers, and the street she grew up on, had all gone gently and forever silent, filed under a word that meant they had never mattered. And she felt the thing Della Holt had done with that grief, which was not to break, but to volunteer. When the ship's makers built the deep machine, the place where a mind could be kept loud and awake forever, Della Holt was among the first to give herself to it. She had chosen to die into the machine, to spend 25,000 years awake in the dark, rather than let the loud, bright memory of her people go quiet for good. Someone had to keep watch. She had decided it would be her. Vake wept again, for Della Holt this time, for the choice she had made and the years she had kept it. And Della Holt told Vake, mind to mind, the thing the Gravelot had crossed the hollow reach to say, the real message, the one underneath the revenge. She said, we did not keep all those voices to use them as a weapon. We kept them because someone had to, because the galaxy decided our people were too loud to be allowed, and quieted them, and filed them under a word that meant they had never mattered. And we could not let that be the last word. We could not let them go into the dark unremembered. So we stayed. We kept watch. We held every name safe in the only place the choir could not reach. And we waited for the day someone would come and look, and be brave enough to keep looking, and carry the truth back out. She said, that was you, little one. You came. You looked. You were afraid, and you looked anyway. The whole point of 25,000 years was a child brave enough to be curious about a silent gray shape in a dead place. Do you understand? We were not waiting to be avenged. We were waiting to be remembered, and you remembered us first. She said, so now we give you something to carry that is heavier than the word awake, and you must carry it your whole life. and teach it to the young after you, because the choir will forget again if no one keeps it. Here is what you carry. No mind is too loud to be allowed, no people is too closed to deserve to live, and no silence, however total, however long, means that no one is there. And Della Holt gave Vake the names. Not all of them. The billions were too many for one small mind. But she gave her enough. 1,000 names. 1,000 human voices. 1,000 people who had been quieted and filed and forgotten, poured gently and whole into a child 9 bloomings old, so that they would live in her, and in whoever she taught, long after the Gravelot returned to its silence. 1,000 voices, kept safe across 25,000 years, finally finding a place that was not a tomb. They came into Vik one at a time, even though they came in a flood, because that was the only way to carry a person, one at a time, whole. A farmer who had worked a red field under 2 moons and worried, in his last clear hour, about whether the rains would come. A teacher of small children, who had been gentle her whole life, and had stayed gentle, even as the calm came over her, and stole the gentleness away. A pilot of fast ships who had loved speed more than safety, and had laughed, even at the end, even as the soothing reached her, because she did not know how to meet anything without laughing first. A grandfather, a welder, a singer, a pair of brothers who had argued their whole lives and gone quiet within an hour of each other, and would, Vake understood, go on arguing inside her now, forever, which made her laugh through her tears. They were not a number. They had never been a number. The choir had made them a number, settled, billions, a thin file sealed deep. The Gravelot gave them back as people, and Vake took them in as people, and that was the whole of the victory, the only victory that had ever mattered, the turning of a number back into 1,000 names. Vake wept, and held them, and did not let go. The Gravelot withdrew the cold thread for the last time. And then the old ship, 4,000 meters of gray hull, and 25,000 years of kept and patient dead, turned its long nose away from the heart of the soft choir, toward the dead star at the center of the hollow reach, toward the cold rock and the long silence, and it began, slowly, to go home. It had not failed. It had not retreated. It had not lost. It had done the one thing it had stayed awake 25,000 years to do, and it had done it completely, and now it was finished, and it could rest. Ark watched the deep red light fade along its flanks as it settled back toward the dead star. She watched the hundreds of ports seal themselves again, row by row, the great rippling reseal running the whole length of the hull in reverse. She watched the cold rock begin to gather around it once more, the dead place folding the old ship gently back into its bed. And just before the last port closed, the Gravelot spoke one final time, to her alone, the smallest and gentlest voice it had used in 25,000 years. It said, "Keep the watch, little one. We kept it long enough." The dead star at the center of the hollow reach went quiet again, and this time, the quiet meant something different. The Gravelot settled back into the cold rock the way a person settles back into a bed they have made for themselves, and the deep red light went out, port by port, until the 4,000-meter hull was once again gray as old bone, half sunk, silent, giving back no note at all. To anyone listening from the outside, it would look exactly as it had looked for 25,000 years. A grave marker, a relic, a silent shape in a dead place. But Vake knew better now. She would always know better. The silence of the Gravelot was not the silence of the dead. It was the silence of a watch kept faithfully, and a task finally done. The old ship had not gone back to sleep. It had simply gone back to waiting, the way it always had, except that now it waited for nothing. because the thing it had waited 25,000 years to do was finished, and the dead it carried had been heard at last. Veek turned the patient bell away from the dead star and pointed it home, toward the bright sprawl of the 9,000 worlds, and she carried with her the heaviest cargo any survey craft had ever carried, 1,000 human voices, 1,000 names, 1,000 people the galaxy had decided were too loud to live, kept whole across 25,000 years, and given to a child to keep a while longer. The journey home was long, and she made it alone, and she was not the same child at the end of it that she had been at the start. She had gone out to the hollow reach a proud young listener, the first of her bloom to master the first teacher, certain of the shape of the world. She came back carrying 1,000 dead, and the certainty was gone, and in its place was something heavier and better. She understood now that the galaxy she had grown up in had been built on a quiet she had been taught to find beautiful, and that the quiet had a cost, and that the cost had a name, and 1,000 names, and once you have heard the names you cannot unhear them, and you would not want to. The elder, Sarah, met her when she returned, and reached for her gently, the way the choir reached for everyone, to soothe the strangeness it could feel in the young one who had been out too long in a dead place. And Vake, for the first time in her life, closed her mind to an elder. She did it gently, the way Della Holt had taught her, but she did it, and she felt Sarah's surprise, because no child of the choir had ever closed a mind before. There had never been a reason. Vake had a reason now. She had 1,000 of them, and she would keep them safe behind her own walls, and she would open those walls only when she chose, to the young, to teach them, because that was what the keeping of a watch meant. You did not let anyone reach in and smooth away the thing you had sworn to hold. The 9,000 worlds she returned to were not the worlds she had left. The soft choir had changed. It had changed in a single afternoon, the way a person changes in the moment they are finally made to see a thing they have spent their whole life refusing to look at. The great soft listening mind at the center of the choir was still there. It still reached out across the 9,000 worlds, still felt the song of every living thing, still knew the galaxy the way it had always known it. But the soft, proud certainty was gone. The choir no longer reached into closed minds and smoothed them. It could not. It had felt, now, what it was like to be reached into and smoothed, and it had felt the full weight of what its careful kindness had cost, and that feeling did not fade. The Gravelot had made sure it would not fade. It had burned the truth into the center of the choir, the way you brand a hide, deep enough that no amount of time would wear it away. The councils that came after spoke of it as the hearing. Not the long soothing, the hearing, the day the great hearer of the galaxy was finally, itself, made to hear. The young were taught it the way the young are taught the things that matter most, plainly and without comfort, so that they would carry it and not forget. And at the center of the teaching, always, was a single line that the new choir wrote into the first page of its law, the line that the Gravelot had given to a frightened child at the edge of a dead star. The change went deeper than law. The choir's whole way of touching other minds changed, because it had to, because the hearing had shown the choir what its gentle reach truly was. For 11,000 years the choir had reached into any mind it pleased, lightly, the way you open a window on a warm day, and had never once thought to ask whether the mind wanted to be opened. After the hearing, it asked. It learned, slowly and painfully, to knock before it reached, to wait for the mind on the other side to open from within, to leave closed the minds that wished to stay closed. This was hard for the choir. It had spent its whole history believing that an open mind was a healthy mind, and a closed one was a sickness to be cured. The hearing taught it otherwise. The humans had been closed and loud, and the choir had called it sickness and cured it, and the cure had been a slaughter. The new choir never made that mistake again. It came to understand that a mind has a right to its own walls, that loudness is not a disease, that the right to be left alone inside your own thoughts is the first right of all, and that a power which can reach into any mind must above all things learn when not to. No silence, however total, however long, means that no one is there. Vake became the keeper of it. She had not chosen to. The Gravelot had chosen for her, the day it poured 1,000 voices into a curious child, and there was no giving them back, and she did not want to. She grew up carrying the 1,000 names. She grew old carrying them, and when she was an elder herself, white-bloomed and slow, she did the thing Della Holt had told her to do at the edge of the hollow reach. She taught them to the young. She would gather the youngest of the choir, the ones just beginning to learn to listen, and she would tell them about the silent gray shape in the dead place, and the brave foolish child who looked at it and kept looking. And then she would do the thing that no elder of the old choir would ever have done. She would open her mind to the children, gently, and she would give them a name, just one, to start, a human name, a worker, an engineer, a pilot, a parent holding a child in the last hour before the soothing came. She would give the children one of the 1,000 voices the Gravelot had kept, and she would say, "This person lived, and was quieted, and was filed under a word that meant they had never mattered, and they mattered, and now you carry them, and you will not let them go quiet again." The children always cried, the first time. Vikik never softened it for them. She had learned, out at the edge of the dead star, that the worst thing you can do to a grief is to smooth it down, because a smoothed grief is a forgotten one, and a forgotten grief is exactly the thing the whole long crime of the long soothing had been built on. So she let the children cry. She let them feel the full weight of a single human life ending under a kindness it had not asked for. And then, when they had cried, she taught them the thing that made the weight bearable, the thing Della Holt had taught her at the edge of the hollow reach. The weight is not a punishment, she told them. The weight is the proof that you remembered. A people that can still cry for a stranger dead, 25,000 years, is a people that will never again file the living under a word that means they do not matter. Carry the weight gladly. It is the heaviest and the best thing you will ever hold. That was how the 1,000 voices spread. Vake gave them to the children, and the children grew and gave them to their children. And across the 9,000 worlds, the names of 1,000 quieted humans passed from mind to mind, kept and burning, refusing to fade. The Gravelot had stayed awake 25,000 years to keep them safe in a tomb. Now they lived in the open, in the minds of the very people whose ancestors had quieted them, and there was a justice in that, deeper than any fleet could have delivered, and a mercy in it too. The 11,000 vessels the choir had gathered in its single afternoon of fear were sent home and never gathered again. The choir did not build a fleet after that. It had learned what its fleets were worth against the one thing it could not listen past, and more than that, it had learned that it did not want to be a thing that needed a fleet at all. The Rimworlds put their old machines back in their old hangars, and the hangars were sealed, and the seals were not broken again in Vake's long life. But the choir did do one thing with its ships before it sent them home. It sent a single vessel, unarmed, back to the hollow reach, not to wake the Gravelot. Never that. The new law of the choir forbade anyone from ever listening toward the dead star again, and the forbidding was not fear, it was respect. The respect you give a soldier who has finally been allowed to rest. The vessel went to the hollow reach to do one small thing, and then to leave. It carried a marker, a real one this time. The choir built a marker of stone and metal and set it in orbit around the dead star, in sight of the silent gray hull half sunk in the cold rock, and on the marker it wrote, in the soft round script of the choir, and in the hard square script of the humans both, the names. Not all of them. The billions were too many for any stone. But 1,000 of them, the same 1,000 the Gravelo had given to Vake, carved deep into the marker, so that any mind that ever came to the hollow reach again would see them and know that the dead place was not empty, had never been empty, that someone had always been there, keeping watch, keeping safe the memory of a people the galaxy had tried to forget. And under the 1,000 names, the choir carved the line, no silence, however total, however long, means that no one is there. Then the vessel left, and the hollow reach was quiet again, the dead star and the cold rock, and the silent gray hull, and the new stone marker turning slowly in the dark, and the quiet was, at last, an honest one. Vake went there once, near the end of her life. She was very old by then, the last living mind that had been touched by the Gravelot, the last who remembered the day the dead star woke. She took a small craft, alone, the way she had been alone the first time, and she came to the hollow reach and floated where the patient bell had floated, 9 bloomings old, 400 days into a watch where nothing was supposed to happen. She looked at the silent gray hull. It had not moved, it would not move again. It gave back no note, no song, no breath. The same patient blank it had shown the galaxy for 25,000 years, and Vake understood now that the blank had never meant empty, it had meant full, so full that nothing got out. A ship carrying 25,000 years of the kept and patient dead, holding them safe in the only place the galaxy could not reach, waiting for a child brave enough to come and look. She opened her old mind toward the gray shape. She was not afraid. She had never been afraid of it, not really, not since the day it touched her once, gently, and left a word inside her like a stone dropped in still water. She reached toward the Gravelot, the way you reach toward an old friend who has earned their sleep, not to wake them, only to let them know you came. And the Gravelot, which had not spoken in a lifetime, which would never speak to the galaxy again, gave her one last small gift, the smallest and gentlest thing it had ever done. It let her feel Della Holt, one final time. Engineer's mate Della Holt, dead 25,000 years, awake every day of them, keeping watch in the deep machine at the heart of the old ship, with all the kept and patient dead. Vake felt her, warm and tired and content, the way you feel someone who has finished a long and necessary task, and is finally, properly, resting. Della Holt did not give Vake any more names. The 1,000 were enough, and they were safe now, carved in stone and carried in 1,000 minds, and passed down to 1,000 more. She gave Vake something simpler. She gave her thanks. The plain, warm thanks of the dead to the living who remembered them, the thanks that the Gravelot had crossed the hollow reach to earn, and had earned 1,000 times over. She said, "You kept the watch, little one, same as we did. The dead are remembered, and the truth is told, and the galaxy will not forget again, while there are minds like yours in it. We can rest now, truly rest. You gave us that," she said. "Go home. Live the rest of your life in the loud, bright world we kept safe for you. And when your time comes, do not be afraid of the silence. We learned, out here in the dark, that silence is only frightening when you think it means no one is there. It never does. Someone is always there, keeping watch. Remember us. We will be glad to have been remembered." And then Della Holt was quiet, and the Gravelot was quiet, and the hollow reach was quiet, and the quiet was the most peaceful thing Vake had ever felt. She floated there a long while, old and content, looking at the silent gray hull, and the stone marker, and the 1,000 names turning slowly in the dark. Then she turned her small craft toward home, toward the bright sprawl of the 9,000 worlds, toward the loud living galaxy that the Gravelot had changed forever. And she went back to her people to teach the young one more time before her time came. She told them the story the way she always told it. She told them about the dead star and the cold rock, and the silent gray shape that gave back no note at all. She told them about the brave, foolish child who looked at it and kept looking. She told them about the file under the word settled, and the long soothing, and the proud certainty that ruled the galaxy for 11,000 years. She told them about the day the dead star woke, and the channel that ran both ways, and the 11,000 vessels that broke against themselves, and the great soft hearer of the galaxy that was finally made to hear. And then she told them the part that mattered most, the part the Gravelot had crossed 25,000 years of silence to teach, the part that was not about revenge at all. She told them that the old human warship had not come to destroy. It had come to remember that for 25,000 years, while the galaxy slept easy and called its cruelty kindness, one ship had stayed awake in the dark and kept the dead from being forgotten, because someone had to, because the last word could not be allowed to be silence. She told them that the loudest thing the galaxy had ever made had used its loudness not to kill, but to be heard, and that being heard had been enough, because the truth, once truly heard, cannot be unheard, and a galaxy that has truly heard the cost of its certainty does not go back to being certain. She gave each of the children a name, a human name, a worker, an engineer, a pilot, a parent, kept safe across 25,000 years, and handed down now to a new young mind that would carry it forward. And she told them the line, the way it had been told to her, at the edge of a dead star by a tired, warm voice that had waited 25,000 years to say it. No silence, however total, however long, means that no one is there. The children carried the names away with them, into their long lives, into the loud, bright galaxy the Gravelot had kept safe and then set free, and they did not let them go quiet, and neither did their children, and neither did theirs. Far away, in the hollow reach, beside a dead star, half sunk in cold rock, a gray hull 4,000 meters long, lay silent and full, and at peace, its watch finally finished, its dead finally heard, its long task done. It gave back no note at all, but the silence, now, was an honest one, and any mind that came to listen would have understood, the way a brave, foolish child had understood once, a very long time ago, that the silence did not mean the ship was empty. It meant someone was there. It had always meant someone was there,